Today, Iran stands as a nation of profound paradox, where the headlines of 2026 reveal a country at a historic crossroads. Since 1979, the Islamic Republic has existed as the polar opposite of the Iran that preceded it, a 2,500-year legacy of monarchic rule and a secular liberal society replaced by a theocratic autocracy masquerading as a republic. But after 47 years of resistance, the tide has turned. Following the waves of protests that defined 2025, early 2026 marked a definitive tipping point where the counter-revolution shifted from a dream to a movement for the restoration of Iran. As the world watches the fallout from recent military strikes and the unprecedented bravery of the Iranian people, we dive into the events that brought us here, from the 12-day war to the celebrations in the streets and what might come next.
I've made the statement very strongly that if they start killing people like they have in the past, we will get involved. We'll be hitting them very hard where it hurts.
Welcome to WatchMojo, and today we're breaking down everything you need to know about the political crisis unfolding in Iran and what it means for the country's future.
Despite bullets, arrests, and complete internet blackouts, ordinary Iranians are still risking everything for freedom.
Number 10. A revolution nearly half a century ago still sets the rules today.
It began just after midday when a few hundred demonstrators, and it must be emphasized that it was no more than that, began to throw a chain of burning barricades across streets throughout the city center.
Everything happening now has a long echo. Back in 1979, millions of Iranians rose up and pushed out the Shah, bringing in a new system led by Ayatollah Khamenei. Months later, protesters stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and held American diplomats hostage for more than a year.
In November 1979, shortly after the exiled Shah is admitted to the United States for medical treatment, Iranian militants seized the American embassy in Iran. More than 50 men and women are held hostage despite worldwide appeals for their release.
The fallout froze relations, hardened mistrust, and locked both sides into cycles of suspicion that never really went away. The Islamic Republic that was born out of that moment built a structure that fused religious authority with political control. Fast forward to today, and the people marching in the streets aren't just reacting to bad economics. They're challenging the foundations of the system that came out of that revolution.
The people on the streets clearly believe that the Shah will not be returning to Iran. But everything that we have seen here today, laid out in such magnificent splendor on this unique visit, is clearly designed to give the impression of a man and a family who will one day be returning to their home.
Number 9. Iran has paid a heavy price for the way it projects power abroad.
The past few days have seen growing evidence of Iran's resistance turning very gradually into a kind of offensive. This oil installation at Kut received a direct hit from Iranian planes 3 days ago. The storage tanks further south at Fao, Iraq's main oil outlet to the Gulf, have also been hit, but this time by ground fire.
Since the revolution, Iran's leaders have treated foreign policy as a battlefield, sometimes literally. The brutal Iran-Iraq war in the 1980s scarred a generation. Sanctions piled up afterward, especially as Iran clashed with the US and Europe over its nuclear program.
Iranian assets in the US were frozen. Trade in goods and services fell under a ban from 1979 to 87, following missed opportunities with the first Bush administration in 1995. Sanctions directly targeted oil. Under an executive order by President Clinton, Washington clamped down on Tehran's support for organizations the Americans considered terrorists.
At the same time, Tehran built a network of allies and armed movements across the Middle East, from Hezbollah in Lebanon to militias in Iraq and Syria and the Houthis in Yemen. Whatever the strategic logic, many Iranians now say those choices drained resources from hospitals, schools, and livelihoods at home. When protests broke out in late December of 2025, they spread fast to all 31 provinces because people feel the cost of those policies every single day.
The falling value of Iran's currency has fueled a third day of demonstrations in the capital, Tehran. Shopkeepers and market stall holders began protesting against rocketing food prices on Sunday, and today they were joined by university students demanding political change. There have also been protests in other parts of the country.
Number 8. Elections happen, but the real power isn't on the ballot.
The shrine at Mashhad, the place of martyrdom, a pilgrimage site for Shia Muslims. Whoever wins the election, this is still the Islamic Republic, where the supreme leader and councils of unelected ayatollahs hold parallel and greater power than the elected president and legislature.
White people, they all expecting from the president to give the service, but the real power is somewhere else.
Iran holds presidential and parliamentary elections, but the system is designed so the most important decisions never really leave clerical hands. Under Velayat-e-Faqih, the supreme leader sits at the top. He supervises the military, shapes the courts, and ultimately decides the bounds of political debate. Bodies like the Guardian Council screen who's allowed to run, blocking candidates who might challenge the system too directly.
All qualify to vote, but none will bother. You care about politics?
I myself know. I don't care, because I know that I'm not gonna have any effect, I don't know, on the politics.
You don't think there's anything you can do to bring change?
I don't think so.
You can feel the limits everywhere, from who gets to speak publicly to what policies can actually be implemented. That's why so many protesters now aim higher than economic grievances. They're calling for changes to a structure that millions believe isn't capable of reforming itself from the inside.
Now, what began as discontent over the collapsing economy, things like rising prices, a plunging currency, and chronic power and water outages, but it's now rapidly evolved into something more widespread. It is anger at the entire system.
Number 7, the Revolutionary Guard isn't just the muscle, it's the system's backbone.
Established in the wake of the 1979 Islamic Revolution, the Revolutionary Guards are often described as a parallel government within Iran. Tasked with protecting Iranian interests at home and abroad, it's also heavily involved in regional politics and conflicts.
The IRGC began as a force meant to protect the revolution. Over the decades, it became a power center all its own. Part army, part intelligence service, part business empire. In a crisis, the Guard steps forward, and that's what we're seeing now. Along with besieged military units, IRGC personnel are on the streets, at checkpoints, and surrounding universities and neighborhoods where protests have surged.
The Islamic Republic's Revolutionary Guard Corps has actively engaged in terrorism and created, supported, and directed other terrorist groups. The IRGC masquerades as a legitimate military organization, but none of us should be fooled. It regularly violates the laws of armed conflict. It plans, organizes, and executes terror campaigns all around the world.
Human rights groups report live ammunition being used on crowds, arrests mounting into the thousands, and security forces moving aggressively to shut down any momentum. For the ruling system, the Guard is the guarantor of survival. For many Iranians, it has become the symbol of what stands between them and the country they want to live in.
The Revolutionary Guards also control much of Iran's economy and wield significant political power domestically, as many of their former members work in parliament.
Number 6, young Iranians are done waiting for things to improve.
You cannot rule over whole, caged birds. These are young people who have aspirations, who look at their neighboring countries. They're really not asking for very much. They're incredibly patriotic. Many of them are spiritual. They just want a tiny bit, an iota of freedom.
Iran's median age hovers in the mid-30s, which means millions of Iranians have no personal memory of the revolution. They've grown up watching prices rise, jobs vanish, and freedoms shrink, while the state stays rooted in the political culture of the 1980s.
And goodness knows where Iran would have been had the young entrepreneurs, how these amazing young people that you have just listed could have just had a tiny bit of ability to move on without being, oppressed, held back by sanctions, etc., that never harm the top echelons. It always gets the guy in the street.
When protests began on December 28th in Tehran's bazaars and university districts, young people were there first and in the biggest numbers. The tragedy of 23-year-old student Rubina Aminian, fatally shot as protests intensified, became a rallying point. Her death resonated far beyond Tehran, fueling vigils and marches in cities like Shiraz, Ahvaz, and Mashhad. The generational divide could not be clearer. An aging leadership defending a system younger Iranians increasingly see as a prison, not a homeland.
government. Many young people said to me, we want a government that if it's good, we re-elect it. If it's bad, we throw it out of office. We're Muslim because our parents were Muslim. So within Iran, this has been bubbling away now for many years.
Number 5. Protests aren't new, but this wave feels different.
For a few days in July, it looked like the start of a second revolution. Students on the campus of Tehran University demanding political and social reform, and demanding it now.
Iran has seen uprisings before. 1999, 2009, 2019, 2022. Each time, the state cracked down hard, forced people indoors, and waited for the anger to dissipate. This time, that formula isn't working as smoothly.
It's like a war zone. The streets are full of blood. They're taking away bodies in trucks. Everyone is frightened tonight. They're carrying out a massacre here. It's officially a massacre.
The unrest has touched every corner of the country. Villages, university towns, industrial hubs, border regions, and pulled together groups that don't always stand side by side. Teachers, truckers, bazaar merchants, and students have all joined in. Rights groups now estimate more than 10,000 arrests and hundreds of deaths.
And activists say the death toll in Iran has climbed to 538 and more than 10,000 detained amid an internet and phone blackout this weekend. Now, we've seen rallies across Canada as Iranians here struggle to connect with family and friends.
In Fardis and Senandaj, witnesses describe panic as automatic gunfire scattered crowds. The sense on the ground, even through blackouts and silence, is that the old safety valve isn't relieving the pressure anymore. Number 4, Tehran is trying to turn out the lights.
Alec, many of the people that we talked to at today's protest have family back in Iran. And with the internet currently out there and that death toll rising every day, they said that their voices are one of the only tools that they have left. I'll go ahead and show you what it looked like earlier today at the Capitol this afternoon. Chants filling the air as hundreds gathered outside the state building to call for regime change in Iran.
On January 8th, the Iranian state flipped the switch on the country's digital life. Internet access collapsed across Tehran, Mashhad, and dozens of other cities, followed by mobile disruptions that left families struggling for basic communication.
Last I talked to my cousins was 3 days ago or 4 days ago, but that was before the blackout. So they said they're okay, but a lot of people are very concerned. Almost everybody has someone back home. They are killing people because just simply we're against the government.
The blackout didn't stop the protests, but it made them harder to follow, harder to report, and far more dangerous. Videos still make it out. Blood on pavement, volleys of gunfire, hospital hallways jammed with the wounded. Doctors quietly say morgues are overflowing. State media calls protesters, quote, foreign agents and, quote, thugs, echoing familiar lines. But a government that cuts the country off from itself sends a silent message. It knows the truth won't flatter it.
Many of us in the diaspora have family, friends, and of course our compatriots in Iran. And it was easier to contact them, I would say, earlier on in the protests, but the last 2 days, there have been complete internet blackouts. And it's difficult for them, too, with their telephone lines, because when they do go out to protest, it's sometimes hard for them to reach each other. So every footage that we can get on the outside is like gold to us.
Number 3, the world is paying attention, slowly, uneasily, but loudly.
In the last 48 hours, Iranians have suffered more casualties than America did after the 9/11 attack. This is a moment that is defining. Despite being completely cut off from the world, internet shut down, and for a regime that is massacring its own people, this is an opportunity to liberate that nation.
As news of killings and mass arrests leaked out, condemnation from abroad followed. Leaders in Europe issued statements urging restraint. UN officials expressed alarm. In Washington, Donald Trump warned Iranian leaders that there would be consequences if the bloodshed continued, hinting at everything from new sanctions to alternative communication pipelines.
Have they crossed your red line yet to trigger a response?
Well, no, they're starting to, it looks like, and there seem to be some people killed that aren't supposed to be killed. These are violent, if you call them leaders, I don't know if they're leaders or just they rule through violence. But we're looking at it very seriously. The military is looking at it. And we're looking at some very strong options. We'll make a determination.
Whether these words translate into meaningful action remains unclear. Having said that, though, the fact that Tehran immediately accused the US and Britain of orchestrating the protests shows how nervous the regime is about losing control of the narrative. Diplomatically, Iran is on the defensive, juggling sanctions, domestic revolt, and the fear that global opinion could harden into coordinated policy.
As you can see, people are still fighting despite this crackdown. They hope that there will be assistance in protecting them from further bloodshed. I've called upon further strikes, and that's beginning to unfold. We're beginning to see more and more defections, which is very important as part of the transition. So all of this is at play as we speak.
Number 2, what happens inside Iran won't stay inside Iran. Iran sits at the geographical hinge point of the Middle East and Central Asia, and that makes every internal tremor feel like a regional warning bell. Oil markets twitch anytime the Strait of Hormuz feels insecure. Gulf states quietly shore up energy exports. Israel watches Iran's proxies nervously, wary of a desperate leadership making bold moves. None of this requires a formal war. The region is already connected through shadow conflicts, cyber skirmishes, and long-range weapons. If Iran's internal walls crack, those fractures could spread outward through migrant flows, force realignments, or proxy groups testing boundaries. The crisis may feel like a domestic story, but its ripples travel farther than most headlines show. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. Number 1, the United States may decide how long this crisis lasts, or how far it goes.
The president posted on social media yesterday, Iran is looking at freedom perhaps like never before. The U.S. stands ready to help. In response to Trump's comments, Iran's parliament speaker told Trump that U.S. military and shipping centers would be considered targets.
America's stance is unpredictable, and that uncertainty shapes every calculation in Tehran. President Trump has again embraced a hard line. More sanctions, fresh threats, and public warnings that the regime will, quote, pay a price for killing citizens. Yet behind the rhetoric is a hint of something else. Reports of indirect messages from Tehran probing whether talks are possible, even now. For Iranians taking to the streets, U.S. statements matter symbolically, but they know they're ultimately on their own. For Iran's rulers, Trump's mix of pressure and potential engagement forces them to brace for the unknown. And for the rest of the world, the question is stark. Does this crisis burn itself out, or is it the start of something larger?
They know also that they do have this international pressure, what we're hearing from the US president, and also significant pushback from the Iranian side, in fact saying that Trump should concern himself with problems in his own country.
The Islamic Republic of Iran has just carried out one of the deadliest assaults on its own people in recent history, yet you would hardly know it from mainstream media coverage. Iran is not a Sykes-Picot project. It is one of the oldest continuous nations in the world, home to more than a dozen ethnic groups that identify primarily as Iranian, not as sectarian or colonial constructs. Iran was Zoroastrian until the 7th century, and while Islam has since become intertwined with Iranian society, Iran remains, paradoxically, a deeply secular, liberal, and Western-leaning civilization, albeit one that also retains conservative social traditions. Iran's history is inseparable from monarchy. From Cyrus the Great, founder of the Achaemenid Empire, Iran developed dynasties that lasted longer than many empires elsewhere in the world. In 1905, Iran adopted a constitutional monarchy known as Mashruteh to curb the power of the Qajar dynasty, a dynasty widely viewed as disastrous for Iran's sovereignty and development. In 1925, Reza Shah seized power. Though he initially considered establishing a republic, he retained the monarchy and founded the Pahlavi dynasty, first under himself and later his son, Mohammad Reza Shah, also known as the Shah or Arya Mer. The Pahlavi era modernized, industrialized, and secularized Iran. This included redistributing land previously owned by religious clerics or mullahs to ordinary citizens, a policy that naturally bred resentment among the clerical class. In 1953, Mohammad Mossadegh, described by some as the heir of a Qajar princess and by others as having married into the Qajar lineage, served as prime minister under the constitutional monarchy. Time magazine named him Man of the Year when he sought to nationalize Iran's oil industry. This move prompted the UK and the US to back forces seeking to curb his growing power. Importantly, Mossadegh was not democratically elected by popular vote, but appointed within the constitutional system. During the same period, the rise of Soviet communism fueled the growth of Marxist movements inside Iran. The Shah's reign was, by a wide margin, a net positive. While Iran remained a constitutional monarchy, even supporters acknowledged authoritarian features, including the Savak secret police, comparable to security services elsewhere at the time.
But I am convinced, for reasons explained by Kouroush Akhtari and supported by all other prisoners I talked to, that a great deal of nonsense is talked and written about the use of torture in Iran today.
Ironically, many prisoners Savak spared would later play key roles in the 1979 revolution. Still, Iran advanced socially and economically, including granting women the right to vote. After the 1973 OPEC crisis, the Shah's growing confidence and leverage unsettled Western powers, as seen in interviews such as those aired by the CBC, alongside his independent foreign policy views, including criticism of Israel, even while maintaining diplomatic relations globally.
Do you think our inflation in the Western world is our own fault?
Not mine, anyway, because it started well before we increased the price of oil. You built your progress and your affluence at our expense.
By the Guadalupe Conference, Western powers withdrew support for the Shah and naively viewed an exiled cleric, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, as a manageable alternative. Ironically, the Shah had previously advised Savak not to assassinate Khomeini, who had relocated from Iraq to France.
Would you be so kind as to tell us how you feel about being back in Iran?
In 1979, clerics allied with Marxists to topple the Shah. Refusing to open fire on his own people and suffering from cancer, the Shah left Iran and later died in exile in Egypt. From 1980 to 1988, Iran fought a brutal war against Iraq, whose leader, Saddam Hussein, invaded with backing from Western powers. Iraq used chemical weapons, while the newly established Islamic Republic of Iran fought largely alone. The war ended in a stalemate. Ali Khamenei, not fully credentialed as an Ayatollah, was elevated by power brokers like Ali Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani to become supreme leader under the doctrine of Velayat-e-Faqih, a system placing a cleric above all state institutions. Iran had effectively replaced a secular monarchy with a theocratic autocracy masquerading as a republic comparable neither to France nor the United States. Khomeini preserved Iran's national military, the Artesh, but created the IRGC, or Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, to protect the revolution, in practice to protect clerical rule. Traumatized by foreign interference, the regime pursued an axis of resistance strategy. Despite sitting atop vast oil and gas reserves, the Islamic Republic plundered national wealth to fund proxies such as Hezbollah and Hamas. Ironically, the Palestinian cause was embraced despite historic distrust of Shiite Iran by Sunni Palestinian factions, including Egyptian-born Yasser Arafat, who had aligned with Saddam Hussein. Iran remains a secular nation where a majority admire America and share Western values, yet lacks constitutional protections such as a Second Amendment, leaving the population ruled by clerics enforced through the IRGC. Over time, IRGC leaders infiltrated and hollowed out the Artesh.
If the government today was run by the mullahs and
they would take us back 1,500 years.
From 1979 to today, Iran's currency has collapsed more than almost any other country's, while tens of billions were spent on foreign proxies and trillions lost in opportunity cost due to a confused nuclear policy, despite Khomeini issuing a fatwa banning nuclear weapons. One overlooked factor shaping media coverage is scale and proximity. Since 1979, the global Muslim population has grown dramatically, especially in Europe and North America, where communities once marginal now hold significant cultural, political, and media influence. This doesn't explain everything, but it helps clarify why many outlets and celebrities tread carefully, often conflating Iranians with the Islamic Republic, avoiding nuance and minimizing dissident Iranian voices. In the UK especially, criticism of Islam is routinely dismissed as Islamophobic, regardless of context. Many who hold anti-Semitic or anti-Zionist views have embraced the Palestinian cause, a position most Iranians reject, chanting, quote, "Neither Gaza nor Lebanon, my life for Iran." Polls consistently show roughly 80% of Iranians oppose the Islamic Republic. Of the remaining 20%, fewer than 5% are clerics. About 15% are tied to the IRGC, half ideologically, half economically. Iranians complain about Iran being turned not just into a kleptocracy, but a kakistocracy, with the IRGC looting the country for personal financial gain. Iranians have repeatedly protested unarmed, in the 2000s, again in the 2010s and beyond. Despite this, the Obama administration signed the JCPOA, aiming to prevent nuclear proliferation, which many Iranians disapproved of, as it gave a lifeline to a regime it viewed as illegitimate. In 2022, the murder of Mahsa Amini sparked the Women Life Freedom movement, briefly embraced worldwide, before many supporters quietly reverted to apologizing for the regime. On October 7, 2023, regional dynamics shifted dramatically. When Hamas attacked Israel, the IDF used the opportunity to retaliate in Gaza, decimate Hamas, and decapitate Hezbollah. With those proxies gone, the regime of Bashar al-Assad fell in Syria. That domino effect removes a key counter the Islamic Republic counted on to keep Israel at bay. In 2025, Israel and the Islamic Republic engaged in a 12-day conflict, with Israel killing senior IRGC leaders and nuclear scientists. The regime justified its nuclear ambitions after Donald Trump withdrew from the JCPOA. In January 2026, Iran's bazaris, the merchants, protested currency instability, triggering broader uprisings demanding freedoms enjoyed in the West. Foreign intelligence services, including Mossad and possibly MI6 and the CIA, reportedly saw an opportunity to topple a regime that had spent 47 years chanting death to America. But after the regime restored internet access, mounting video evidence proved that the vast majority were indeed ordinary unarmed civilians tired of a regime that could not even provide stable electricity and water needs to the nation's 95 million population. For days, regime forces were overwhelmed. BB guns and tear gas failed. At that point, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei allegedly ordered live fire. Official figures cited 3,000 deaths. Iran's own health ministry suggested up to 30,000, with independent estimates as high as 100,000, making it one of the deadliest state massacres of its own citizens in modern history.
With the pain of the conflict in Gaza and the suffering of the Palestinians, I've been profoundly moved by the images of thousands of Palestinians returning to their communities.
This is why Western media and celebrities, many of whom championed the Palestinian cause and condemned Israel while accommodating the Islamic Republic, now face a reckoning.
The values of community, of generosity, and yes, of sacrifice. These are Muslim values. These are Canadian values.
Their framing of Iran may have been misplaced at best, misguided at worst. Further complicating the willingness of Western media and institutions to listen to, let alone amplify Iranian voices, is the fact that while there are sincere dissidents abroad and opposition figures inside Iran, the overwhelming majority of Iranians have so thoroughly rejected theocracy and become disillusioned by the regime's distortion of what a republic is meant to be, that many have gravitated toward the exiled crown prince, Reza Pahlavi, the son of Mohammad Reza Shah.
We have come to the point where people are just fed up with this regime. They are saying death to the dictator. They want to liberate themselves. And their demand for freedom is met with the most brutal reaction by a regime that is waging war on its own citizens.
Given the role the United States played in the Shah's fall, this creates deep unease within U.S. administrations about openly endorsing or supporting the Crown Prince, even symbolically. By contrast, other opposition groups such as the MEK have attempted to buy legitimacy by paying American political figures, including the dismissed Mike Pompeo and the disgraced Rudy Giuliani. Yet the MEK's historical alignment with Saddam Hussein and its involvement in killing Iranians from abroad during the 1980s and 1990s has made it nearly as despised among Iranians as the Islamic Republic itself. After a decade in which the regime pinned its survival on so-called reformists, the brutal January 2026 massacres definitively exposed the illusion of reform. They reinforced why Iranians overwhelmingly reject the regime, its reformist factions, and the MEK altogether.
مخالفم با این حکومت جنایتکار آدمکش. خدا لعنت کنه خمینی رو که فتنه در مملکت ما درست که ملت ایران و مملکت ایران و به دین ضربه زدن اینها. بر همه مردم واجب است که بلند بشوند و کلک این حکومت خبیث آدمکش رو بکنن. خدا لعنت کنه خمینی و خامنه ای.
Given this history of distrust, no other dissident or opposition figure commands the same broad appeal as Reza Pahlavi, the son of Arya Mehr, creating an outcome that is awkward for Western policymakers but increasingly difficult to avoid. The current Iranian counter-revolution, a restoration of Iran, also challenges a dominant media narrative centered on the so-called Arab street, which is hardly surprising given that Iran is neither Arab nor Semitic. Iranians are an Indo-European people who, since Alexander the Great's defeat of the Persian Empire, have endured successive periods of foreign domination by Greeks, Romans, Arabs, Mongols, Turks, Russians, British, Americans, and now a clerical ruling class rooted outside Iran. Today's regime draws its ideological lineage from Najaf and Karbala in Iraq, where Ali Khamenei's father was born and where several senior figures, including members of the Larijani family, also originate, and was later institutionalized through religious training in Qum.
ببین میگه برین نگاه کنین ببین شلیک داره میکنه نگاه کن این حرومیو کی تو میگن الله اکبر خامنه‌ای رهبر حرومزاده نگاه شلیک میکنه میگه اینجوری انقلاب میخوایم بکنی نگاه کن.
What more than 80% of Iranians are now rejecting is the rule of this narrow minority, which has retained power not through popular legitimacy, but through intimidation, violence, rape, and murder. When journalists from CNN, the BBC, or the New York Times acquiesce to regime demands, such as compulsory hijab to conduct interviews, many Iranians saw this as yet another betrayal of liberal values, let alone platforming the regime talking points.
و ما از ملت امریکا می‌خواهیم که به این آقای کارتر بگند که ملتی که مظلوم است، ملتی که در تحت فشار است، ملتی که آزادی همه آزادی ها از او سلب شده است، ملتی که استقلال ندارد.
Paradoxically, many Iranians now stand with Israel and America, openly thanking leaders like Benjamin Netanyahu and urging Donald Trump to strike IRGC bases. The regime once labeled such Iranians traitors, but with the supreme leader now linked to mass murder, that tactic has lost its power. Other fear-mongering tactics include the specter of territorial disintegration, even though most ethnic groups identify as Iranians and Iranians chant.
قطعاً حرفای زیادی میزنه. مطمئن باشه که جوابش ما در میدان میدیم.
تاریخ رو بررسی بکنن بر مبنای تاریخ تصمیم.
مسیر غلطی رو انتخاب کردی و داری پیش میری.
حالا این آدم پلید رو سگ زرد وحشی یا دو دوره ریاست جمهوریش یا اگر نشد بعدش حتما باید این تقاضا پس. من اینجور آدما رو میشناسم. این همین الان این ترامپ اگر بگیرن بازداشتش کنن و دو تا تو گوشش بزنن و بیارنش تو دادگاه مثل سگ زوزه میکشه.
As the U.S. builds a larger military presence near Iran, the media's day of reckoning is coming, even if Hollywood remains silent.
Short time ago, the United States military began major combat operations in Iran.
Welcome to WatchMojo, and today we're discussing the events taking place in Iran as of March 2026.
Its menacing activities directly endanger the United States, our troops, our bases overseas, and our allies throughout the world.
On February 28, 2026, after weeks of negotiations between the United States of America and the Islamic Republic of Iran, American President Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu launched a joint attack on various sites in Iran, which has been occupied by the Islamist regime that seized power following the Islamic Revolution in 1979, and which has chanted death to America and death to Israel ever since. The operation, codenamed Roaring Lion by Israel and Operation Epic Fury by the United States Department of Defense, targeted key officials, military commanders, and facilities. The attack included the assassination of the second supreme leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei. In 1979, the Islamic Republic replaced Iran's historical lion and sun flag, or Shira Khorshid, signaling the campaign's objective was nothing less than regime change.
Our objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime, a vicious group of very hard, terrible people.
It was seismic. Reports described a barrage of Tomahawk missiles, followed by more than 30 bunker buster strikes targeting hardened command sites deep inside Iran. Military compounds, strategic headquarters, high-level meeting locations. Among the targets, the Ministry of Defense, air defense systems, judiciary leadership centers, the IRGC's main headquarters, parliament-linked sites, the state media headquarters, and notably, the site of the regime's atomic energy organization. Before striking the head of the so-called snake, the supreme leader's compound just as Khamenei was meeting with a number of his top officials.
ما باید انشالله ترامپ رو اگر بشه یک مثل کاری که اینا با مادورو کردن.
Casualties included IRGC chief Mohammad Pakpour, Army Chief Amir Khatami, Defense Minister General Aziz Nazirzadeh, and Senior Advisor to Ali Khamenei, Ali Shamkhani. And, before long, it was confirmed that Khamenei and several members of his family had perished. However, his son Mojtaba survived, leaving his role in the regime's future highly uncertain. Following the strike, Khamenei's scheduled speech was abruptly canceled, and he was not heard from throughout the day. Speculation intensified over whether he had survived the initial wave, but the White House soon confirmed he was dead. The regime's state TV subsequently admitted this fact early Sunday morning. Celebrations erupted in the streets, while the ruling minority mourned the loss of the 86-year-old who had controlled the Islamic Republic for 37 years. To fill the void, a temporary leadership council was formed featuring the lesser-known Ayatollah Ali Reza Arafi, who immediately found a target on his back as follow-up strikes continued. Day 1 marked the beginning of the most consequential power vacuum in the Islamic Republic's history. By the second day, there was no reprieve or slowdown, as Israel and America relentlessly pursued regime change against a theocracy that kept threatening Trump even after the January 2026 massacre.
حالا این آدم پلید رو سگ زرد وحشی یا دو دوره ریاست جمهوریش یا اگر نشد بعدش حتما باید این تقاضا بس.
When news broke that the United States had launched targeted strikes against Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps assets, reactions across the world ranged from joy to condemnation. The joy largely came from Iranians inside and outside the country, the condemnation from left-leaning media organizations. It may be strange that so many Iranians, inside and outside the country, were not panicking at the prospect of targeted strikes against the regime's military infrastructure. Some were openly calling for it, and many celebrated with relief and cautious optimism when news broke out. Why would citizens react with relief when foreign forces strike targets inside their own country? To understand that, you have to understand the difference between Iran and the Islamic Republic. Iran versus the regime.
اسلام آمده است که این حرفای نامربوط را از بین ببرد. افراد ملی به درد ما نمیخورند. افراد مسلم به درد ما میخورند.
Iran is one of the world's oldest continuous civilizations, with statehood stretching back thousands of years. When Marxists joined forces with Islamists to overthrow Iran's 2,500-year-old monarchy, the leader of the revolution, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, prioritized Islam over nation. The Islamic Republic has governed for just 47 years, leading to a massive exodus that has created a diaspora of up to 8 million Iranians outside the country. Naturally, those outside are overwhelmingly relieved and ecstatic about the strikes, especially Iranian women, who have paid the single biggest price. But even a majority of over 80% of those inside Iran have grown disillusioned with Khomeini's successor Khamenei embarking on an axis of resistance strategy which siphoned Iranian treasure and blood for the Palestinian cause.
اسلام با ملیت مخالف است. معنی ملیت این است که ما ملت را می‌خوایم، ملیت را می‌خوایم و اسلام را نمی‌خوایم.
For many Iranians, especially younger generations, the regime is not seen as synonymous with the nation. It's viewed as a political system that seized power in 1979 and has ruled through a fusion of theology and state authority under the doctrine of Velayat el-Faqih. In this framework, dissent is not merely political disagreement, it can be framed as heresy. With growing frustration, the youth are using the strikes to push back, toppling statues dedicated to Khamenei. Thus, when Iranians say they support strikes, they are not saying they want harm to Iran. They want the end of the regime, pressuring the regime's coercive apparatus.
مخالفم با این حکومت جنایتکار آدمکش. خدا لعنت کنه خمینی رو که فتنه در مملکت ما درست که ملت ایران و مملکت ایران و به دین ضربه زدن. بر همه مردم واجب است که بلند بشوند و کلک این حکومت خبیث آدمکش رو بکنن. خدا لعنت کنه خمینی و خامنه‌ای.
The IRGC is a terrorist organization.
It looks a lot like you're trying to build a bomb. They're going to continue to have problems, not just with us, but with many other countries in the world.
The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is not just a military branch. It is an economic conglomerate, a political force, and a domestic security structure. It oversees foreign operations, missile programs, including devastating hypersonic ones, internal repression, control of key sectors of the economy, and incompetence and negligence.
They're behind every problem in this region. They are the sole source of instability in the entire Middle East, and the world's been paying a price for this for 40-something years.
This is why inside Iran, few are protesting against the strikes. Reform and protests have proven useless. In the women life freedom movement spawning from the brutal murder of Mahsa Amini in 2022, and even more notably during January 2026, which was the biggest killing of a people by its own government, the IRGC and affiliated forces have been accused by human rights groups of lethal crackdowns. For families who have lost loved ones in those protests, the IRGC is not an abstract institution. It is the face of repression, which explains why Iranians are rejoicing at the pain inflicted to their oppressors. And this is why most are relieved when Basij remnants are being picked apart, to ensure Iranians, who come back to the streets unarmed, are not met with the same violence they met in January 2026. During the 12-day war in 2025, when Israel took out over a dozen IRGC senior members, Iranians rejoiced. That explains part of the emotional response. It also explains how much Iranians have not only defected from the IRGC, but covertly work for Mossad. This explains why and how Israel sometimes flexes its dominance. Islamophobia versus Islamism.
Not your country's an Islamic Republic. It's anti-American, anti-Soviet, anti-Israeli, and anti-some Arab countries.
Many Westerners hesitate to criticize the Islamic Republic and Muslims out of fear of appearing Islamophobic. That hesitation is understandable in a society that values tolerance. But Iranians are largely unbothered by that accusation. Why? Because Iranians have lived under political Islamism, since 1979, with tragic consequences: the fall of their currency, power outages, a lack of water despite being blanketed between the Persian Gulf and Caspian Sea. Iranians have seen firsthand how religion can be weaponized into an ideology of control.
Who is your worst enemy, Mr. President?
دشمن اصلی ایران کیست؟ آمریکا.
Since Islam conquered Iran in the 7th century, Iranians did not lose their language nor their identity the way many nations from Morocco to Iraq adopted Arabic after conquest. Iranians remained Iranian. Iran, or Land of Aryans, consists of over a dozen ethnic groups: Persians, Azeri, Kurds, Lor, Baluch. Persian, or Farsi, is the language. Unlike the Arab street that dislikes America while their governments coddle it, Iran is the opposite, where the regime called death to America, while its people love the USA. For many critics, the issue is not belief, it is state-enforced ideology. The regime's axis of resistance has also grown into frustration among neighboring states due to the IRGC's tentacles. That the Islamic Republic reacted to the February 28th operations by attacking U.S. bases in Arab states, as well as Arab allies in Bahrain, UAE did not endear them at all. Putting the celebrations in context. For some Iranians, targeted strikes against regime infrastructure are seen not as an attack on the country, but as pressure on the machinery of control, with regime change being the only acceptable goal. While the regime says that it killed only 3,000 Iranians during January, laughable if not tragic that this would be an acceptable figure, countless organizations peg the number in the tens of thousands. When Khamenei's death was announced, the jubilation was clear, and as such, understandable, for he had given the direct orders, which were orchestrated by senior regime member Ali Larijani, who became the top political figurehead following Khamenei's death. Transition and uncertainty in near term. It's uncomfortable to watch citizens react positively to foreign strikes on their own government, but it's also revealing. It reveals a fracture between state and society that was exacerbated after the January 2026 massacre. This is not about cheering destruction. It reflects the desperation not just of the violence and repression, but frustration and exasperation of how Iran had become a kleptocracy under the Islamic Republic's tenure under Khamenei, whom Reuters estimates had pocketed nearly $100 billion in assets during his reign. Whether outside foreign intervention leads to freedom, instability, or something in between remains uncertain. But when foreigners who did not support intervention said it was up to Iranians to change the regime, and they were met with machine gun fire, then Iranians pleaded for foreign help.
The entire military command is gone as well, and many of them want to surrender into saving their lives. They want immunity. They're calling by the thousands.
Considering that Cyrus the Great freed the Jews and let them return from Babylon to Jerusalem, it is not surprising to see Israel wanting to repay the debt 2,500 years later by helping free Iranians from the death grip of the Islamic regime. The cracks are showing, with members of the IRGC beginning to flee to Afghanistan. And this coming on the heels of growing defections, which Donald Trump reiterated on his second day of the offensive.
I once again urge the Revolutionary Guard, the Iranian military, police, to lay down your arms and receive full immunity or face certain death.
But one thing is clear. Despite Iranian sentiments, this was not obvious to the left and in Western media, even though Iranians rejoiced and were relieved to the point of renting a plane in Los Angeles to fly a banner thanking the President of the United States. Fear of civil war.
The only one who's to blame is Ali Khamenei, and if that leads to the destruction of this regime, this terrorist, I'm okay with it.
Critics warn of scenarios like Iraq and Libya. Supporters of pressure argue that Iran is different. It has a large, educated population, a deep cultural cohesion, and a strong civil society under strain. The debate inside the Iranian community is complex. It is not a simple pro-war versus anti-war divide. It's a conversation about whether internal change is still possible, or whether the system is too entrenched. What Iranians want is what America was built upon: freedom, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
And I hope that our king, our Shahanshah, will return and rebuild our country, and my country can see better days.
There's been a dramatic intervention by the US president overnight into the fate of the Iranian women's football team.
Welcome to WatchMojo, and today we're discussing the current realities for women in Iran and why Iran's women's soccer team may need asylum. When sports and politics collide, the consequences can be severe. Recently, members of Iran's women's national soccer team refused to sing the anthem of the Islamic Republic during the Women's Asia Cup in Australia. Soon after, a regime spokesperson publicly labeled them, quote, wartime traitors. In many countries, that might spark debate. In Iran, it can be life-threatening. From past executions of athletes to international refugee law, here are 10 key examples that explain why the world is now discussing possible asylum and protection for these players.
They claim that the women gave them hand signals that amounted to SOSs and pleas for help.
The Asian Cup protest.
An 11th hour fight is underway to keep the Iranian women's football team in Australia, with grave fears the young women will face execution if they return to their war-torn country.
The controversy began at the Women's Asian Cup on Australia's Gold Coast. During pre-match ceremonies, several Iranian players declined to sing the anthem of the Islamic Republic. Similar silent protests have occurred before in global sports, but in Iran, dissent by public figures can carry serious risks.
She says 6 players have told her they want to stay in Australia.
A few of them have expressed this, a few of them are very certain about this.
Others, she says, are torn, concerned for their loved ones back home, with reports the family of one player has already been detained.
The gesture was widely interpreted as a quiet act of solidarity with millions of Iranians who oppose the regime. What might look like a small act on the field quickly became a major political statement, and one that could have consequences once the players return home.
How do you feel about returning to Iran?
Eagerly, we want to come back to Iran as soon as we can, and I want to be with my country and with all Iranians inside.
The wartime traitor accusation.
زمان جنگ باید شدیدتر برخورد کرد. هر کسی که یه قدمی علیه کشور تو شرایط جنگی برمی‌داره باید شدیدتر باش برخورد کرد. مثل این ماجرای سرود ملی نخوندن تیم فوتبال زنانمون و اون عکسی که منتشر شده اینا که حالا کاری ندارم، با اینها باید شدیدتر برخورد.
Shortly after the match, an Iranian government spokesperson appeared on state television and labeled the players, quote, wartime traitors. That phrase carries enormous weight in Iran's legal system.
یه حرکت اعتراضی نمادین و فلان و اینا نیست. اینکه تو بری اونجا سرود ملی نخونی، این اوج بی‌شرفی و بی‌وطنی. هم مردم هم مسئولین با اینا به عنوان خائنین زمان جنگ برخورد کنن. نه اینکه حالا یه اعتراضی داشتن و یه کار نمادین کردن.
Charges related to treason or actions against the state have historically led to harsh sentences, including imprisonment or execution. Public accusations like this can also create pressure on the judiciary to act. For many observers, that televised statement transformed what had been a sports protest into a potential human rights emergency.
ننگ بی‌شرفی و خیانت باید رو پیشونی اینا بمونه، جدا باید باهاشون برخورد درست حسابی هم بشه.
Naveed Afkari.
We have an update for you on a troubling story coming out of Iran. State media are reporting that a championship wrestler has been executed. Naveed Afkari was sentenced to death in 2018 for the alleged murder of a security guard. Now, Afkari said that his confession was made under duress after he had been tortured.
Iran's history with athletes and political dissent makes the concern very real. Take the case of champion wrestler Naveed Afkari, whose arrest and execution sparked a wave of international outrage that the sports world has not forgotten. Arrested after participating in protests, Afkari said his confession was extracted under torture.
We do believe it's a case where Iran has targeted a high-profile athlete, and as you would expect from the perspective of trying to drive human rights in sport and make sure that sport is true to its humanitarian values and the rights of athletes are upheld, this is a case of devastating concern. Naveed was put into what they call the death wing on the weekend.
Despite global appeals from athletes and human rights organizations, he was executed in 2020. His case shocked the world of sports and demonstrated that even internationally recognized athletes can face severe punishment when accused of opposing the regime.
It's a brazen act by the state to proceed with the execution, given the international scrutiny that the country has been placed under by this extraordinary campaign. We do think that the International Olympic Committee and the other sports bodies need to make it clear that this act does result in suspension.
Mehdi Ali Hosseini. Another case that raised alarms internationally was Mehdi Ali Hosseini, another national wrestling champion. Executed in 2021, his death sparked condemnation from human rights groups and international sports advocates. The execution reinforced concerns that Iran's justice system can move forward with capital punishment even when cases involve prominent athletes. For many observers, cases like Afkari and Hosseini illustrate why accusations against athletes today are treated with such urgency.
Sport can be a force for good, but it has to back up good words with powerful and strong deeds. And this sends a very, very troubling message to athlete activists in difficult countries where it's difficult to have that courageous discussion, that they are incredibly vulnerable if they try to fight for positive change.
Habib Khabiri.
حالا بهتاش فری بازنده گل مساوی صاحب توپ سانت میکنه اون جبهه روی سره کار نمیرسه و بلافاصله شوت توی دروازه یه گل بی‌امان دیگه برای ایران حبیب خبیری.
The pattern stretches back decades. Habib Khabiri, once captain of Iran's national football team, was executed in 1984 after being accused of political opposition during the early years of the Islamic Republic. His case is often cited as one of the earliest examples of an elite athlete becoming a victim of political repression. The fact that a national team captain could be executed remains a powerful reminder that fame and international renown hasn't always protected Iranian athletes.
اخلاق و منش انقلابی و انسانیش نمود پیدا کرد هنگامی که فعالیتاش چهره اجتماعی و انسانی بیشتری به خودش گرفت. در یکی از نامه‌هاش برای من نوشته بود که گر مرد رهی میان خون باید رفت و اینو تا آخر زندگیش ادامه داد و من
Houshang Montazer al-Zahor. Yet another athlete whose fate remains a warning is Houshang Montazer al-Zahor, a national team wrestler executed in 1981 amid political crackdowns following the Iranian Revolution. His case is less widely known, but is frequently cited in discussions about the regime's treatment of athletes suspected of political dissent. Together, these historical examples form the backdrop to current fears about the safety of Iran's female soccer players.
The Athletic also reporting that 5 players from the Iran women's soccer team have defected. They're now being cared for by Australian federal police in a safe house, and the team had reportedly been made aware of their options by the Australian government earlier in the week, and then it was discovered that 5 players were missing at the team's scheduled dinner on Monday. So this story is still developing as we speak right now, Marnie.
The 2026 crackdown.
The full scale of the casualties in Iran after the brutal crackdown against anti-government protesters is still not known. But one human rights group based in the US, which is meticulously putting together evidence, has now confirmed the killing of over 6,000 people during the unrest at the start of January.
Concerns about the players also come amid a broader climate of repression. In January 2026, Iranian authorities themselves acknowledged that more than 3,000 protesters were killed during nationwide unrest.
We have looked at preliminary evidence that shows us that there are bodies in morgues that have medical equipment on them, and yet they have bullet holes in the middle of people's foreheads.
Independent observers suggest the real number could be significantly higher. Historically, governments facing internal dissent sometimes intensify crackdowns to deter further protests. In that context, a highly visible act of defiance by a national team could draw unwanted attention from authorities.
After Iran's 2-0 loss to the Philippines last night, outside the stadium, protesters attempted to block the football team's bus leaving for their hotel over concerns for their safety if they return to Iran.
Women at the center of protest.
It is 1 year to the day since a 22-year-old Iranian Kurdish woman named Mahsa Amini died in a hospital days after the morality police arrested her in Tehran. They said she had violated Iran's Islamic dress code that requires women to wear a headscarf or hijab and cover themselves in loose, full-length clothing.
Women have often been at the center of Iran's protest movements, and tragically among the victims. Mahsa Jina Amini, whose death in morality police custody sparked the Woman Life Freedom movement, became a global symbol.
Women led the protest, fed up with the restraints strict Islamic law puts on them, including telling them how to dress. Their protest mushroomed into a global movement. Women cut their hair to show solidarity. Their rallying cry? Women, life, freedom.
Other victims include Neda Agha Sultan, shot during the 2009 protests, and Nikah Shakirami, a teenage protester whose death shocked the country. Cases like Hadiz Najafi, Sarina Ismailzadeh, and Armita Garavand highlight the risks women face when challenging authority in Iran.
Nikah Shakarami was 16 when she disappeared in September 2022 after telling a friend that police were chasing her. Her family found her body 9 days later. The authorities denied involvement in her death, claiming she took her own life. But what appears to be a classified report by Iran's Revolutionary Guards reveals the teenager was beaten to death by the agents who detained her.
International refugee law.
First of all, UNHCR was established in 1950, and after the creation of UNHCR to find solutions for refugees, people who were displaced because of the Second World War, the tasks was given to those states to work on a text, on a treaty to protect refugees.
If the players fear persecution, international law offers potential protection. Under the United Nations 1951 Refugee Convention, countries cannot return someone to a place where they face serious threats to their life or freedom. This principle is known as non-refoulement. Because the team is currently in Australia, Australian authorities have the legal ability to grant protection if the athletes request it.
A family member of one of the players has spoken to the ABC and confirmed that the 5 players who are understood to have sought asylum have been able to leave their hotel here on the Gold Coast. We're not exactly sure what that means in terms of where they've gone next, but that they are in fact not here right now.
If necessary, other democratic countries, including Canada or the United States, could also offer humanitarian pathways. In a direct communication with Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, US President Donald Trump cut through the political tension with a blunt offer. Quote, "The US will take them if you won't."
Donald Trump has said that 5 Iranian soccer players have been taken care of in their bid for asylum in Australia. He said that the rest are on their way. He's praised Prime Minister Anthony Albanese for doing a very good job with this rather delicate situation.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. A soccer solution.
Canada's newest women's professional soccer league wraps up its inaugural season this fall. Its debut marked a turning point in women's soccer in Canada, drawing some of the best talent from coast to coast. The Northern Super League launched in April, and amid the buzz of the WNBA and the PWHL, there was a lot of hype.
One creative proposal aims to protect the athletes while allowing them to continue their careers. Canada recently launched the Northern Super League, its first professional women's soccer league, while the United States hosts the National Women's Soccer League with 16 teams.
Where were you when Rose finally broke the tie? When Temwa walked up the Golden Boot?
When we redefined what it means to hit the celly.
When Trin scored the game winner.
With 22 clubs across the 2 leagues, even signing 1 or 2 players per team could provide opportunities. Another option is launching a new club, potentially in Canada, ensuring current players' roster spots remain untouched while offering a safe place for the Iranian athletes to play.
They each play 25 regular season games. Then, the top 4 teams head to the playoffs. Then there's the National Championships November 15th in Toronto.
This league is fantastic. Playing in Canada is really special, and this league showing the little girls that you're able to play professional in your home country is so special.
For these players, refusing to sing an anthem may have been a small gesture, but in their political environment, it was an act of courage. Now the world, from governments to the political sporting community, must decide whether that courage will be met with protection. Because sometimes, the most important decisions in sports happen far beyond the field.
If they pass the security requirements and they seek asylum, then the government should grant them asylum, because we know the record that Iran has when it's dealing with women.
On February 28, 2026, the world woke up to a geopolitical earthquake. One of the most powerful and polarizing figures in modern history, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was reportedly eliminated in a massive joint U.S.-Israeli strike.
That's right, Jessica. 2 Israeli sources telling me and my colleague Tal Shalev that Israel has confirmed that the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has been killed as a result of those Israeli strikes.
But while the headlines are focused on the architect himself, this story is about much more than just one man. It's the culmination of decades of ideological warfare, proxy battles, and a regional strategy that finally reached its breaking point.
Our objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime.
Welcome to WatchMojo, and today we're breaking down 10 things you need to know about why Khamenei became a target and what happens next.
Iran would have been much, much closer to a nuclear weapon, maybe even have a nuclear weapon by now.
The post-Cold War power shift. After the Soviet Union collapsed, the U.S. stood as the world's lone superpower.
It's the former Soviet Union that is now in trouble. Gorbachev acknowledged that he has left the country in a dangerous state.
But as the decades passed, the unipolar moment faded. While China rose economically and Russia rebuilt its military, a loose counterbloc began to form. On one side, you have the US, EU, UK, and Israel. On the other, an alignment of Russia, China, and the Islamic Republic of Iran. Khamenei positioned the regime as the ideological spearhead of this resistance, making the Islamic Republic a central player in a new era of global competition. 1979, the strategic flip. It's easy to forget, but before the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Iran was actually America's primary ally in the Middle East. When that alliance collapsed, the regional map was redrawn. Traumatized by the Iran-Iraq War, where Western powers backed Saddam Hussein, Tehran began investing in the Axis of Resistance.
But Iran does have a network of allies across the region. It has a name for it, the Axis of Resistance.
The goal? Avoid direct war by building a massive network of proxies to surround adversaries and deter them through asymmetric power. For nearly 40 years, it was a strategy that defined the region.
It can also use these positions to attack U.S. interests or threaten Israel closer to its border.
October 7th changed the equation. The events of October 7th, 2023 upended decades of regional rules. In the years that followed, the response was overwhelming. Hamas was severely degraded, Hezbollah's leadership was systematically targeted, and the Assad regime in Syria eventually collapsed.
They toppled statues, including this one of Assad's late father, and they also liberated political prisoners.
Suddenly, the forward defense perimeter Tehran had spent decades building was gone. For the first time in his long tenure, Khamenei looked exposed, and the architecture of his deterrence was crumbling.
It must be punished and will be punished, he said.
The revolutionary survivor. Ali Khamenei wasn't always the obvious choice for leader. Born in 1939 and a disciple of Ayatollah Khamenei, he rose to power in 1989 despite not being the most senior cleric at the time. To make it happen, the Iranian constitution was actually amended to fit his credentials.
And as supreme leader, he had to build his power base. He did so by aligning himself with Iran's hardline military force, the Revolutionary Guard.
To his supporters, he was a stabilizer and a guardian of sovereignty. To his detractors, he was the face of an immovable theocracy. Regardless of the perspective, his almost 37-year rule made him the longest-serving contemporary autocrat in the region.
But he was becoming increasingly unpopular.
The security state expansion. Under Khamenei's watch, power in Iran didn't just stay the same, it centralized. The Supreme Leader's office grew in influence, while the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, evolved from a paramilitary group into a military economic powerhouse.
While the IRGC oversees the Quds Force, which is responsible for foreign operations, it's also influential in national politics.
By filtering elections and constraining reform movements, the regime shifted from revolutionary populism to a system of institutional control. It was a strategy built for durability, not flexibility.
It controls key sectors of the Iranian economy, oil, construction, telecommunications, and finance, and is believed to hold up to 50% of the country's oil wealth.
Proxy power and regional reach. Khamenei's signature doctrine was simple: leverage others to fight your battles. By funding and arming groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Iraq, and the Houthis in Yemen, the Islamic Republic of Iran achieved strategic depth and deniable pressure on its enemies. However, proxy warfare is a double-edged sword.
As you know, Iran's proxy armies are attacking Israel. At the same time, the United States has moved warships to the region.
When those proxies escalate too far, the sponsor eventually inherits the consequences. Following the fallout of October 7th, that risk finally turned into a direct reality for Tehran.
A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime.
Nuclear brinkmanship. Nothing defined Khamenei's relationship with the West more than the regime's nuclear program. Framed by Khamenei as a, quote, moral duty and a symbol of anti-Western defiance, the program became the ultimate bargaining chip and the ultimate flashpoint.
In early 2021, analysts estimated it could have taken Iran between 9 months and 2 years to build a nuclear device.
As negotiations stalled and sanctions intensified, the program became a symbol of resistance to some. But to the US and Israel, it was a destabilizing threat that effectively painted a target on the regime's back.
We have completed our very successful attack on the 3 nuclear sites in Iran, including the Fordow site, Natanz, and Esfahan.
Internal repression. While Khamenei was defiant on the world stage, he faced growing pressure at home. From the Green Movement to the 2022 Mahsa Amini protests and recent economic unrest, the regime responded with increasing force.
What we're witnessing at the moment is different. These protests are mainly led by women, and they have the support across the full spectrum of Iranian society.
Executions rose and civil society constricted, creating a paradox. The regime looked powerful and defiant externally, but was becoming increasingly brittle internally. By 2026, the greatest threat to the Islamic Republic wasn't just an invasion, it was a crisis of legitimacy.
Ayatollah Ali Khamenei today accused demonstrators of damaging public property to please the U.S. president.
Strategic isolation. By early 2026, the walls were closing in. With Hamas and Hezbollah weakened and the IRGC facing decapitation strikes, the regime's untouchable status vanished.
As you said, we're seeing the largest buildup of firepower in this region, and that says a lot since the invasion of Iraq in 2003.
Deterrence only works if it's credible, and once the perimeter collapsed, the architect of the system became its greatest liability. The decision to target Khamenei wasn't just a symbolic gesture, it was a structural move to dismantle the very head of the regional resistance network.
Iran's formerly supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, is dead.
Will the Muslim world erupt? The biggest question following the strike is what happens next. Many predicted that the death of the supreme leader would cause the Ummah to rise in a unified revolt. However, history suggests a different outcome. When Qasem Soleimani was killed in 2020, there were threats and outrage, but no regional uprising. While Soleimani was not a religious figure, Khamenei's perch as a Shia theocrat actually made him despised by Sunnis who resented the regime's meddling. The Muslim world is politically fragmented and strategically self-interested, with most governments prioritizing stability over avenging Tehran. While escalation is possible, a unified global revolt remains unlikely. The conclusion. Ali Khamenei was more than just a religious leader. He was the architect of a geopolitical doctrine that reshaped the Middle East.
Ayatollah Khamenei blamed the unrest, as he always did, on outsiders, Iran's old enemies, the US, and of course Israel.
His death marks the end of an era, but what follows, whether it's collapse, consolidation, or a total recalibration of Iranian power, remains to be seen. The Islamic Republic's greatest shield was always uncertainty. Now that the world has tested that shield, everyone is watching to see what emerges from the dust.
Combat operations continue at this time in full force, and they will continue until all of our objectives are achieved.
Lehman Brothers is America's 4th largest investment bank, but with losses totaling billions of dollars, tonight it's close to collapse.
What if World War III didn't start with a declaration, but with a series of moments we've already lived through? Welcome to WatchMojo, and today we're looking at the events that may have set the stage for a global conflict.
President Putin made it very clear that Crimea would be joining the Russian Federation.
2026, U.S.-Israel strikes on Iran.
Yes, Sandra, we just got this in literally 2 minutes ago, but Fox News can confirm that Iran's supreme leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei, is dead following Israeli strikes against his compound and location earlier today.
In late February 2026, U.S. and Israeli forces carried out coordinated strikes on the Islamic Republic of Iran's military infrastructure, reportedly targeting facilities linked to missile production and nuclear development. Israeli officials described the operation as necessary to prevent Iran from reaching breakout capability, while American leaders framed it as deterrence.
David, the president announcing Khamenei's death in a lengthy social media post just now. I want to read through to you what the president is saying. He says, Khamenei, one of the most evil people in history, is dead. This is not only justice for the people of Iran, but for all great Americans and those people from many countries throughout the world that have been killed or mutilated by Khamenei and his gang of bloodthirsty thugs.
Tehran condemned the strikes as an act of aggression and signaled retaliation through regional partners. Oil prices spiked. U.S. assets in the Gulf shifted posture. Russia and China issued sharp diplomatic warnings.
There has been a predictably strong verbal response coming from Moscow so far. We had Vladimir Putin over the weekend condemning the killing of Khamenei as a cynical murder. The Russian Foreign Ministry put out a very strong statement too, accusing the US and Israel of plunging the Middle East into an abyss of uncontrolled escalation.
Unlike prior proxy confrontations in Syria or Iraq, this was overt state-on-state escalation. If future historians mark the moment when separate regional flashpoints began to converge, February 2026 may stand out as the point where long-simmering rivalries fused into direct confrontation between aligned blocs.
Yeah, and David, the president, of course, remember, he has long promised not to drag America into these long, protracted foreign wars. But now the president has warned that American lives may be lost in this fight. We do not know how long this is going to go on, whether this will indeed be a long, protracted, prolonged war.
2023. The Israel-Hamas war expands.
Looking in closer detail at the shocking events of early on Saturday morning, you can see people dancing at the Nova Music Festival with no inkling of the horror that's about to unfold. BBC Verify has established that this was taken at sunrise on Saturday. And it's all happening just very, very close to the border between Israel and Gaza.
On October 7th, 2023, Hamas launched a coordinated assault from Gaza into southern Israel, killing roughly 1,200 people and taking hostages. Israel responded with a large-scale air and ground campaign in Gaza. Within weeks, Hezbollah exchanged fire across the Lebanese border. Iranian-backed militias targeted U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria. The United States deployed carrier strike groups, including the USS Gerald R. Ford, to the eastern Mediterranean.
It's really about deterrence. So this is a big show of presence, show of support, and frankly, show of strength that the U.S. military is putting into the region. The idea is they're showing support for Israel in their fight against Hamas, but they're also hoping that this, by sending this massive military presence forward, a carrier strike group, another one on the way.
In the Red Sea, Houthi forces attacked commercial shipping, prompting multinational naval patrols. What began as a devastating regional conflict quickly drew in global actors, directly affecting trade routes and energy flows. While not a formal world war, the episode demonstrated how interconnected modern conflicts had become. Multiple power centers operated in the same theater, testing deterrence lines and alliance commitments in real time.
All around Israel, the hope is that the U.S. showing that they will willingly send forward so much military power into the area that will deter anyone who may be considering supporting Hamas in the days and weeks and potentially even months ahead. So that could include groups like Lebanese Hezbollah up in Lebanon. We've been hearing a lot from Matt Bradley, who's there.
2022, Russia invades Ukraine.
These are among the darkest hours for Europe since the end of World War II.
Breaking news right now. Russia has attacked Ukraine, marking the start of a new war in Eastern Europe. An advisor to Ukraine's president says that about 40 people have been killed so far.
At dawn on February 22, 2022, Russian forces crossed into Ukraine from multiple directions, following President Vladimir Putin's televised address announcing what he called a special military operation. Missiles struck Kiev, Kharkiv, and other cities. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky refused evacuation, reportedly declaring, quote, "I need ammunition, not a ride."
That's the kind of leader you want to see, and we need to provide him the ammunition. Really, the other thing is continue to move U.S. troops to the borders of NATO, not into Ukraine, but we need to show Putin that this alliance stands together.
The invasion triggered sweeping Western sanctions, including freezing Russian central bank assets and removing key banks from SWIFT. NATO reinforced its eastern members, and Finland and Sweden moved toward membership. The war revived trench warfare, drone combat, and open nuclear signaling in Europe. More than any event since 1945, It shattered assumptions that large-scale territorial conquest on the continent was unthinkable.
Today, Russia began an attack on Ukraine. Putin began war against Ukraine, against the entire democratic world. He wants to destroy my country, our country, everything we've been building, everything we are living for.
2020, the pandemic shock.
In the past 2 weeks, the number of cases of COVID-19 outside China has increased 13-fold, and the number of affected countries has tripled. There are now more than 118,000 cases in 114 countries.
In March 2020, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a global pandemic. Borders closed, global aviation nearly halted, markets plunged. Supply chains fractured from Wuhan to Rotterdam to Los Angeles. Accusations escalated between Washington and Beijing over transparency and responsibility. The phrase strategic decoupling entered mainstream policy debate.
Well, there's no question that we are at an all-time low point in Sino-U.S. relations. I think you have to go all the way back to 1979, when the United States normalized relations with the People's Republic of China, to see things, this stark.
Vaccine distribution became geopolitical leverage, with China and Russia shipping doses abroad, while Western states prioritized domestic campaigns. The crisis exposed vulnerabilities in globalization and deepened mistrust among major powers. Defense planning was quietly adjusted as governments reassessed dependence on rival supply chains for critical materials and technology. While not a shooting war, the pandemic destabilized the economic architecture that had underpinned relative great power peace. Historically significant conflicts often follow systemic shock that weakens institutions and amplify rivalry. In that sense, 2020 may represent a structural fracture rather than a health crisis alone.
Despite the efforts taken, though, COVID took a devastating toll.
The CDC says close to 150 million cases of the virus were reported in America since the start of the pandemic, leading to roughly 1.2 million deaths.
Just in Ohio, nearly 45,000 people lost their lives.
2016 to 2020, the U.S.-China strategic break.
In particular with China, we're going to be doing a Section 301 trade action. It could be about $60 billion, but that's really just a fraction of what we're talking about.
Beginning in 2018, the United States imposed sweeping tariffs on Chinese imports under President Donald Trump's first administration. Citing unfair trade practices, Beijing responded in kind. Technology firms such as Huawei faced sanctions and export restrictions.
Piling the pressure on Chinese telecoms giant Huawei, the U.S. Justice Department on Monday filed an array of criminal charges against the company. A 13-count indictment filed in New York accuses Huawei, its chief financial officer Meng Wanzhou, and 2 affiliated firms of bank and wire fraud, as well as conspiracy in connection with Iran.
The U.S. Department of Defense formally pivoted toward, quote, great power competition, signaling a shift away from the counter-terror focus that dominated after 2001. Military activity intensified in the South China Sea, where China had constructed artificial islands and militarized outposts. In 2019, then Vice President Mike Pence declared that the era of engagement had failed. The rivalry hardened under successive administrations, with semiconductor export controls and Indo-Pacific security partnerships expanding. While no shots were fired, the cooperative framework that defined the early 2000s had visibly eroded.
We have right now an $800 billion trade deficit with the world. So think of that. So let's say we have 500 to 375, but let's say we have 500 with China, but we have 800 total with the world. That would mean that China is more than half.
2014, Russia annexes Crimea.
Putin has just wrapped up his address. What did we learn specifically, Guy?
Well, this wasn't exactly a speech long on de-escalation talk. President Putin made it very clear that Crimea would be joining the Russian Federation. He talked about the fact that Russia felt robbed when Crimea was handed over to the Ukraine.
Following protests in Kiev that ousted Ukraine's president, unidentified armed personnel seized key sites in Crimea during February 2014. Within weeks, Russia formally annexed the peninsula after a disputed referendum. Vladimir Putin defended the move as protecting Russian speakers and correcting historical injustice.
We had a referendum which took place in the Crimea, fully consistent with all norms of international law. More than 82% of voters took place, and more than 96% of those who voted for reunification with Russia.
Western governments condemned the annexation as illegal and imposed sanctions. NATO began rotating troops into Eastern Europe under what became known as Enhanced Forward Presence. The episode introduced hybrid warfare into mainstream discourse, cyber attacks, information operations, and deniable troops operating without insignia. It was the first forcible redrawing of European borders since World War II. While combat was limited at the time, the annexation destabilized the regional balance and set the stage for a far larger invasion 8 years later. Many analysts now view 2014 as the opening chapter of a prolonged European conflict.
This speech was very long on history. That really was the justification for the decision to accept Crimea into the Russian Federation, or re-accept the Crimean Peninsula into the Russian Federation. It's about NATO. It's about the long-term rivalry that exists between Moscow and NATO, and I think that's what it ultimately boils down to, Betsy.
2008. The global financial crisis.
Meanwhile, more grim news for Lehman's staff. Administrators said they couldn't guarantee they'll be paid at the end of the week.
On September 15, 2008, Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy, sending shockwaves through global markets. Stock exchanges plummeted. Governments launched massive bailouts. The crisis triggered the deepest recession since the 1930s. Beyond economics, the geopolitical consequences were significant. Western financial institutions appeared fragile, while China's stimulus-driven rebound reinforced perceptions of its rising power.
It will build schools and subways, power plants and hospitals. That creates jobs for laborers laid off when factories closed as exports to the U.S. fell.
Populist and nationalist movements gained momentum across Europe and North America, reshaping domestic politics and alliance cohesion. Trust in globalization and liberal economic consensus weakened. Defense budgets and foreign policy priorities shifted amid fiscal strain. Major wars often emerge from periods of economic upheaval that unsettle established power hierarchies. In retrospect, the crash of 2008 may be remembered as the moment America's dominance stopped looking permanent.
I was very happy in Lehman, so yeah, I like this company and I'm just disappointed for everybody. I think it was a great company. I'm just, yeah, sad.
2001, the September 11th attacks. On September 11, 2001, coordinated attacks by al-Qaeda destroyed the World Trade Center towers in New York and struck the Pentagon, killing nearly 3,000 people. Within weeks, the United States launched Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan.
On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. These carefully targeted actions are designed to disrupt the use of Afghanistan as a terrorist base of operations and to attack the military capability of the Taliban regime.
In 2003, it invaded Iraq, reshaping the Middle East's power balance. NATO invoked Article 5 for the first time.
The text states, in part, that an armed attack against a NATO member in Europe or North America shall be considered an armed attack against them all. The definition of an armed attack has evolved since the treaty was signed in 1949. NATO members decide what qualifies as an armed attack.
The war on terror expanded across continents, from drone campaigns to intelligence sharing networks. Surveillance laws broadened. Iran's regional influence grew following the collapse of Saddam Hussein's regime. While this era did not resemble a traditional multi-power world war, it placed the United States on a sustained war footing and altered alliance structures globally. Some scholars argue that the destabilization unleashed after 2001 laid groundwork for later confrontations. If historians seek the earliest rupture of the 21st century order, they may begin their narrative here.
The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
All right. Hello, everyone.
You have just watched a compilation of WatchMojo's coverage of the conflict in Iran, and we'd like to follow that up with a little bit of a Q&A session exploring what the situation is right now and how things may potentially resolve. So I'm here with WatchMojo CEO and co-founder Ashkan Karbis-Rushan, who is a bit of a domain expert in this area. Ash, you've written numerous articles and scripts that turned into WatchMojo videos about the things going on in Iran right now. What is the situation as it stands right now?
I mean, 3+ weeks into this war, which is really, I would say, the continuation of the 12-day war in 2025, I think both sides, if we're going to be intellectually honest, can point to numerous signs and evidence that they're winning, right? And I don't think either side would be wrong, because success, I've said in business, is fluid, subjective, relative. So it's how you define it. So the US and Israel did not define success as regime change, even though many Iranians, possibly 80%, even more so after the January 26th massacre, who opposed the regime, certainly wanted regime change. And I think 99% of Iranians outside in the diaspora want regime change. You know, Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu pointed to, you know, the threat of the Islamic Republic, death to America, death to Israel, the nuclear ambitions or ambiguity, the very impressive and extensive investment in missiles and drone. They said they wanted to kind of like kibosh that, right? And so for them, victory, if it's regime change, is one thing. If it's really to set Iran back or the Islamic Republic back, is another. And we'll get to how you could score them. For Iran and the Islamic Republic, the mullahs and the IRGC who seized power in 1979 and for 47 years have ruled Iran, for them, frankly, success is just survival. It's to keep, you know, the so-called Islamic Revolution alive, even though many in the Muslim world say that the Islamic Revolution and the guardianship of the jurist, Velayat-e-Faqih, is blasphemy in some ways. And, you know, I've discussed how Sunnis and Shias historically, you know, don't really like or trust each other. But so for them, success is just survival. You know, they don't want to be regime changed. And as many have pointed out, for them, it's not just survival. If they don't, you know, push back America, who the regime really fears are the Iranian people, who don't have the Second Amendment. So when they go out there in January and protest and want the very same liberties and freedoms that you and I take for granted, and then they're gunned down, and the government brags about only 3,000 Iranians killed, even though the number is probably 30,000, probably not 100,000, but it's certainly not 3,000. Yeah. They know that if the people do really rise, and especially if American, Israeli aerial power gives them cover, and especially if IRGC and Basij, or police and unpaid, you know, police effectively are you know, their headquarters are blown up, so they lose that power. They fear that the Iranian people are going to basically, you know, somebody said hang them, like seek vengeance for 47 years of oppressive intimidation, rape, violence, et cetera, et cetera. So that's to set the stakes. America has decapitated everybody. I mean, Donald Trump jokes about it, but he's like, there's nobody left, right? Like, I mean, the IRGC, who were all individuals who largely fought together against Iraq in the Iran-Iraq war, you know, they rose to power. And yeah, there's a lot of corruption, and there's a, you know, not just kleptocracy, it's a kakistocracy, right? I mean, it's not a functioning government. It is a bit rogue. It is a cartel. Like, these are how others describe it. And the IRGC is like an economic machine that controls anywhere from 50 to 80% of the Iranian economy, which is an oil-rich country, or it should be if it were to invest in normal things and not just missiles and drones and the so-called axis of resistance, which were the proxies, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Palestine, the Houthis, and of course Syria, which after 10/7, Israel basically decapitated and decimated, set back, basically imploding this so-called axis of resistance that at the time of need for the regime we're not there, So Iran, the Islamic Republic, is left alone, so to speak. So America has decapitated the entire leadership. They took out the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, who, when he became the supreme leader, was not even really an ayatollah. So again, they just kind of make things up as they go along to seize power and retain it. So they took out Ali Khamenei, who for 47 years is the Islamic Republic. He's been the head of state since '88. So like one of the longest autocratic, theocratic despots and dictators. Charismatic, though, you got to give him that. And, he projects this image of modesty, even though Reuters says he's stashed $100 billion of assets. So they took him out. They took out, the head of this, the head of that, the leader of this, the leader of that. Now, it is fair also to say that it's not the mullahs and the IRGC. They learned from the Shah. The Shah, was overall net positive, was a very good leader. Everybody has flaws, but the Shah was more of a one-man kind of institution. Yes, great prime ministers, a lot of, one of my favorite, Iranians of all time is an army leader Air Force leader that the mullahs killed, Nader Jahanbashi, I believe. But my point is, it was a one-man institution, and when the Shah left, there was nothing really to withhold it, and the Shah did not want to fire on Iranian civilians, unlike the regime. So the IRGC has a lot of people that could step in very quickly, right? Their entire system was built around it not being based on one person. But they've also, Israel and America, hit IRGC bases and Basij, or like unpaid police, and police stations, which were the headquarters of torture, and to kind of go back and rearm themselves to then go back to the streets and kill, which has basically softened, the long-term grip that the regime has on the country. The thing to note is the reason why the IRGC is so formidable was the bond that a lot of these people, even if like the Larijanis were not even if some fought in the Iran-Iraq war on the front lines or not, they were all part of the tight group that basically rose during the war, and then they seized more power, and then they kind of became more corrupt and accumulated a lot of wealth that ultimately, between the violence and the corruption, is what drives the Iranian people nuts, because they're like, we don't have water, we don't have electricity, our currency has fallen, inflation is high. So it's just this, boiling water that is going to spill over, and has. But the people, there's about, if we just ballpark it, there's like 100 to 200 people that ruled the regime who were really, really embedded and went back 2, 3, 4 decades. The US and Israel has taken out like 100 of those people, right? So obviously, as you chip away that leadership, what happens is a lot of the others have already fled. Their kids are in the West. They've shifted assets in the West. They see the writing on the wall. The joke is nobody wants to be supreme leader, because the second you're chosen, you're going to get whacked. You could make the case that, is that fair? Is that legal? But it's a regime that is constantly threatening Israel and America. So if they're making the threats, the other side, being objective, I want peace, but the other side is allowed to retaliate. So if 10-7 was a response or was resistance, then what IDF did was a reaction. You got to pick and choose your battles. And I do think that the younger Basij, who are unpaid, who no longer have bases to go to, they sleep in their cars as they roam the streets, there will be defections, more defections. And so whereas a threat or a risk, which I always felt was not really valid, was disintegration and civil war. I said Iran is not like Libya, Syria, Iraq. Iran is the oldest continuous country in the world. It's historically a dozen or so ethnicities that identify themselves as Iranian. Geographically, it's a fortress. I was like, I don't think there will be disintegration or civil war, but what you're seeing, ironically, is disintegration of the IRGC and the Basij. So eventually, the top gets killed, some flee or defect. In the middle, there's confusion. Everybody's a lone wolf. And at the bottom, people will just walk away because they're like, well, we don't want to get droned and killed by an Israeli drone or an American, bomb. So then that gives eventually power to the people to rise and seize the key places. Now, the US, actually Israel also struck some oil facilities, and even Iranians who were for regime change and supported the strikes. Some of them were like, well, this is not, this is crossing the line because that is infrastructure to help rebuild. But then others say, well, the Iranian people never got the benefits of the oil. It went to the Shamkhanis. It went to the people that were corrupt and, had seized all the wealth. So it's very nuanced. Now, America and Israel will not be able to regime change just through aerial power, right? So at the time of this recording, Donald Trump had given a 5-day pause before unleashing hell to try to get Iran, the Islamic Republic, to kind of remove the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, which I think is actually buying time for possibly some Marines to land in a few places. CNN is broadcasting all these details. I don't know if they're accurate. I don't think they would actually go to the island where people think, because that's a bit precarious. I think they might, if they do that, go more to the east of Iran, which is less precarious and it makes the soldiers less vulnerable. But I'll let military experts go into that. But so America could totally argue that we're winning. And in many ways they are, because they've set back the missile. Now, Iran, let's talk about this. So, when we did top 10 incredible inventions of the Persian Empire, some people were impressed that Iran invented not just, the first version of civil rights with the Cyrus cylinder. We invented refrigeration. We invented irrigation. We invented the lute, the precursor. We played a huge part in mathematics and medicine and all that. And some people say, well, these were pre-Arab conquests. Some people say after. It doesn't matter. These are Iranians. Greater Iran included parts of Afghanistan, included Iraq. Iranians were in India. Iranians were many places, right? But we're talking about modern day Iran. We remain very resilient people. We remain very ingenious people, right? We're smart. We're educated. We solve problems. Now, my frustration is this generation has basically funneled that brilliance to building missiles and drones, which is a bit of a shame. But they have invested, because they don't really have an air force on par with Israel or America. And their Navy got sunk the first few days by, insane onslaught of firepower by US and Israel. They have invested in missiles. And I think the mistake, and I even wrote about this during the 12-day war, when the Islamic Republic lobbied a bunch of missiles into Israel, people laughed and they said these missiles are slow, this and that. But I was like, everybody who knows what they're talking about is saying they're depleting older technology. Then they start to showcase their hypersonic missiles, which are insane. And there's no amount of, David Sling, Goliath's this, Shield. And Israel could have the best air defenses. These are massively impressive, scarily dangerous weapons of mass destruction, and they've been hit. Now, the propagandists are like, Tel Aviv has become a desert. No, but Tel Aviv has taken massive hits. The regime has been able to hit, Dimona and many parts, and Israelis have been living in shelters. And Israelis are saying we are willing to do this so long as it takes, because we view the Islamic Republic as an existential threat. So we're willing to be in shelters. They cite Cyrus the Great freeing the Jews from Babylon, letting them go back to Jerusalem and build their temple. So there is this bond where they're like, we're repaying the favor. The Islamic Republic can also take a lot of credit, because for them, victory was not defeating the Zionist state or taking down the great Satan. For them, it was just to survive, and they've been able to survive, even if all these people have been killed. I know it sounds weird, but if for them it's the survival, and this is a death cult that believes that martyrdom is a good thing, even if there's no 72 virgins waiting for them, they've been able to withstand. Now, it helps is a big word. A single loss of life is tragic. I condemn it outright. There was an accident on the first day where 168 little angels, they died. There was an IRGC base next to a school. They had apparently incorrect satellite data. So I don't know if it was an errant missile that the US fired or, incorrect information. People at first thought maybe it's an IRGC missile that went haywire, but I think it is proven that it was a mistake. It was an accident. Whereas Iran, the Islamic Republic kills civilians. And, even after 3+ weeks, there's been less killing of Iranian civilians, then the regime killed Iranians in a couple of days, right? So I'm not saying either is right or bad, but there's a lot of intellectually dishonest people. But so the Islamic Republic has a lot of leverage because they also could put a chokehold on the Strait of Hormuz where all this oil goes. Again, it raises the question of like, why is the world still so dependent on oil where it's like the Strait of Hormuz or the other strait next to Yemen? If you choke those off, the economy goes haywire. But because of that, it does give the Islamic Republic a disproportionate advantage. That's a symmetric war. And, not to their credit, I don't think the Islamic Republic is like targeting like hospitals or schools, but they are targeting residential places. And they're like, hey, if you hit our infrastructure, we'll hit your infrastructure. If you, if you are an Arab nation hosting an American base, fair game. And so there is a bit of miscalculation on both sides. Americans not understanding Iranians. Like when Donald Trump says, I want total surrender, I'm a nobody. Nobody listens to me. That's not actually how you're going to get Iran to surrender. When News Corp, very different, but just to show you the DNA, when News Corp sued me and they're like, we're going to shut you down. I was like, no, you won't. And very similarly, they were much more resource rich than I was, but I crushed them. How? It's just Iranian resilience. We're wired differently. I don't agree with the regime, but I understand the DNA, right? So it's more like if Donald Trump was smart, and he's smart in some ways, but he's not in others, and that's all leaders. He wouldn't talk about a surrender. He would frame it more as like, it's time to transfer power to the Iranian people. If you want amnesty, last year I wrote an article about an amnesty that like the Iranian people offer IRGC and clergy. And in exchange, the end of Vilayat Faqih, it's not a theocratic state. Whatever you've done, killings, whatever you've done to hoard wealth, transfer power to the people, go teach your religion in some seminary, leave if you want, go to Iraq at the time, go to Syria, wherever. And a lot of Iranians were like, who opposed the regime, were like, look, it's intellectually clever and insightful, but they're like, we want justice. We don't want vengeance, but we want justice. These people have killed Iranians and you live in Canada. You're not aware of what we've gone through. I said, okay, I'm just here to, pontificate. But so America can absolutely claim victory because they never defined it as regime change or whatever. They go look at how much we've set them back. They're not really the same threat that they were. And there are reports, like it's paradoxical. As much as Iran has shown that it has missiles that go far longer than 2,000 miles, there are signs that they're depleting a lot of their more short-range missiles, which is what they're using to strike, Bahrain and UAE. And I think that part is a big miscalculation, which I chalk up to Ogde, which is a psychological complex, usually pride, hubris. The Islamic Republic thought that if they were to strike these these U.S. bases on Arab soil, but also energy infrastructure, and I'm sure if they could hit the Burj Khalifa, they would. But the point is, they thought by doing this, the Arab states would look to the states and Israel and say, okay, it's time to rein this in. We don't want to get bombarded. But, the Islamic Republic has lost the Arab street. Never mind the Arab street, but the Arab states, because now they're like, well, these bastards talk about Islam and the Ummah and how they're Muslim first, and they're hitting us and they're causing us damage. And the Islamic Republic is all about survival. And Khomeini said it himself. Khomeini, their dear Aftabeh leader, said, I will totally burn down Iran for Islam. Well, the Islamic Republic is burning down Iran. And again, I condemn, even when they kill scientists, I understand they're scientists that build nuclear weapons, it's nuclear energy, but, I go, is that a line you don't cross? But then people correct me and they go, shut up, because these are weapons of mass destruction, so they're fair game. But the point I'm getting at is, the Islamic Republic could go on and just keep firing missiles, and there will be casualties, but not an insane amount of casualties, because Israel and America are really not targeting them. And to this day, whenever the internet, and the biggest sign of just how bastardly the regime is, you're being bombarded. Who cuts off your citizenry and your population from the internet? You're clearly cutting them off from the internet because you know that they would come out and be like, we support this. So what you see out of Iran, especially these useful idiots in the West who go there and they're anti-West, anti-capitalism, anti-Semitic, anti-intelligence, frankly, they're just parroting regime propaganda and saying, look, things are great. The trains leave on time. When the Iranians are, when they can, sending messages saying, we know these bombs are not targeting us. They're targeting the IRGC. The last thing the Iranians want is to leave a more wounded animal who is more militant in power, because the Iranian regime cannot really fight America pound for pound.
Yeah.
So they take it out on the Iranians. And it is ethnic cleansing. It is a genocide by the regime against Iranians who are increasingly secular to make the population 95 million, although 80% plus, probably after the January massacre, 90% plus, because even the people that ideologically or religiously may have been for it, well, they had a son or a grandson that went to the streets seeking liberties and freedom who got killed. So every family in Iran, except really the elite who are for the regime, they've lost somebody. So it's long-term, they will not last. So Iranians are like, well, don't leave a wounded animal that's just going to come out and kill more of us after, finish the job. You know, and it's crazy. Like Iranians are like literally putting up posters of like, you've killed these 50 bastards. These are the 20 remaining bastards. Like history books will look at this and be like, how shitty was this government to its people that they're viewing the Israeli and American armies as the Iranian Liberation Army. Like, I'm just a messenger here. I'm just telling you how they feel. It's insane.
So we did a video asking, has World War III already started following the strikes from the US and Israel? How do you see this conflict ending? Is it going to spiral into a bigger conflict, or can it be concluded in a satisfying way where we see the Iranian people take control back of the country?
Yes. No, I mean, all these things are not mutually exclusive. I think long-term, there's no real case where, even without a Second Amendment, where a minority through just sheer violence can occupy and oppress a people of like 80 million plus people over the long term. But is the long term 4 years, 47 more years, 500 years? I'm not a clairvoyant, but at some point it will crumble from within. Now you could argue it's happening right now. It very possibly could be happening before our eyes. But as I said, when we were discussing the World War III, World War I was not called World War I. It was the Great War. After the fact, they kind of rewrote history to fit a narrative. I've said you could make the case that World War III started on 9/11. And on 9/11, you had Russia, China, the Islamic Republic, Syria. You had a list of belligerents on one side. And on the other, you had the coalition of the willing, US, UK, certain, and UK now is useless with Keir Starmer. But my point is, you could then argue that like there was a continuation and it kind of bubbled up even more with Russia, Ukraine, right? I mean, they were each on one side. China, Taiwan is a bit of a brewing thing. I do think, though, that in 100 years, they may not call it World War III, but I do think they will look at what happened late 90s, but because 93, there was a bombing of World Trade Center, but really from 9/11 till probably the fall of the Islamic Republic. Because the Islamic Republic is the so-called head of the octopus, whose tentacles were the proxies that stoked up, violence in Palestine. And you could call it resistance. Like I always put, like, sure, it started off as resistance, but Hamas basically hijacked the Palestinian cause themselves and enriched themselves, right? You could, Syria, I mean, what did Islamic Republic do? It was a colonialism peak. They destroyed Syria. Lebanon, you could argue Hezbollah started off as resistance. Then it did some administrative things and, civic, infrastructure. You could make all those arguments, but in the end, Lebanon now views Hezbollah as persona non grata, not just the Druze and the Maronites and the Sunnis. A percentage of the Shias who are not Hezbollah or Shia, a percentage of Shia in Lebanon could also be like, well, we miss the old Lebanon, right? So when eventually this crumbles, the Islamic Republic, whether US and Israel kill everybody, or the people revolt, or eventually the green light is given and people hit the streets, or the Kurds, which I don't think is a great idea, like who have weapons, start to push from west to east, and then that's where American forces could deploy on the ground and empower and give weapons to more Iranians. There's a lot of ways this could crumble. But I do think that from 9/11 to when the Islamic Republic ends, whenever that is, they will refer to it as something akin to World War III. And it would be very naive to think that this isn't a global war. Now, because of things like advances in technology, AI, cyber warfare, because of things like that, economic warfare. Yeah, of course, it doesn't look like World War II, same way that World War I looked very different.
Yeah.
But I do think that we are in World War III. Now, how will it end? Nobody knows. I did write an article that said, okay, let's say if the IRGC just gets decimated, the leadership, and then that bond that the Iraq war veterans had is no longer there and present with the younger besieged, and they just walk away, and there's no more forces on the street. Who do you negotiate with? I do think, though, that there is a risk. Now, when I say, I don't mean support, I mean a risk of happening. I had this really bad dream nightmare scenario where the Mike Pompeos and the Mike Pences and the Rudy Giuliani, so these kind of disgraced sideline Republican, and Rudy Giuliani, a great hero during his mayorship of New York, but become a buffoon and a paid clown now.
Yeah.
So these are paid lobbyists or allegedly paid lobbyists, but definitely lobbyists for MEK. That by Iranians is viewed as a terrorist group that sided with Saddam. They don't have any support inside Iran. They're hated outside. These are facts. I'm not saying anything shocking here. I was worried that there was last year, a 25% chance, not that they had 25% support, but a probability, 25% chance that they would be transplanted, like some kind of Blackwater kind of, paid mercenary group would just drop these people. They would have weapons, and then they would turn Iran into an even more dystopian version. What was that Hulu show? The Brides, the one that the gal from Mad Men was on, where the women were anyway, it doesn't matter.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, anyway. People watching will probably get it.
Oh, was it Handmaid's Tale?
Yes, that
Handmaid's
one.
Tale? Yeah.
Just some kind of dystopian, crazy, thing. Today, I think that's less than 5, maybe 1%. I don't think they would be transplanted, because after January 26th and after this, the Iranian people are fed up. They would just, go after them with their hands. So that risk has gone down. Now, nobody in America has 100% support. Even when the president wins, he or she might get 30%. But I do think a plurality, but even a majority, do view the exiled Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi as the only person they trust. And that we've discussed it. It's because, for one, with the benefit of hindsight and passage of time, a lot of Iranians feel bad how they sold out and did not stand by the Shah, the Reza Pahlavi's father. And little note, I'm producing something called the Peacock Throne, which is how Mohammad Reza Shah ascended to the throne in 1941, but let's set that aside. And then the Islamic Republic, even though it's an autocratic theocracy, it's a dictatorship in some ways. They masquerade themselves and present themselves as a republic, although not the Republic of France or America, and certainly not the Republic of Plato, which none of them are. And so they've tainted this word republic. So a lot of Iranians are well, we don't really trust republics, because these politicians come and they just loot and they just cheat. And they also, their hands are dirty and bloody because they were kind of killing us 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago. Whereas Reza Pahlavi has been consistent. If you listen to what he said now, details have changed, tactics of what he says. And I've also said it, his appeal is kind of because of his weaknesses and drawbacks, meaning he's not some strong man like Erdogan. He's a good human being. And, he's been consistent. And I view him more as an executive, not even executive, a chairman role, figurehead who is the closest thing to unity, and not some crazy driven CEO type who's going to come and be I'm this and that. Now, does he have 30%, 50%, 80%? I think 80%, he might have it on a given street or in a given city, but 80% just statistically, not as an Iranian common people. Don't need the toheen. I think statistically 80% across the country used to seem a bit high, but after January 2026, now I'm I don't think that's that high. But I definitely think he has a plurality, if not a majority, of support. Now, the U.S. is coming out and saying, well, rumors. I don't even think this is true. But people who don't like monarchy, people who are probably regime lobbyists in America, regime enablers, traitors to the Iranian people, full stop, who are screaming, crying for help. And then these guys are Islamic Republic is fine. They're well, we're not sure if the U.S. trusts Reza Pahlavi. They don't see in him the kind of strong man that Trump likes. It doesn't matter. It matters right now, sure, because Trump thinks he's going to be kingmaker. But in the end, when said and done, the Iran people are going to decide. So I tell the Iranians, don't overthink these whispers and don't overthink what Trump says. Trump will say one thing and do the other. But so how will it end is, I do think a likely scenario is that you chip away enough the IRGC, the besieged defect, or they're killed. And in this void and gap, there is this kind of transfer of power. And I don't think any IRGC remnants would call it a surrender. It would be some kind of like the Treaty of Tehran, you know, the transfer of power. It has to be worded like that. And I always say psychology, sociology, anthropology matter. If you're an IRGC guy and you eventually transferred power to the Iranian people, because you're always a popular movement, you know, even if it's spin, you could swallow that. But
you're not taking it from us, we're giving it to you type thing.
Yeah, but also we're not surrendering. The main thing is Iranians don't surrender. You know what I mean? That's just, you know, I'm telling you it's raining. You don't have to like it. You don't have to take out the umbrella. I'm not judging. I'm not saying they're good or bad, but they're never going to surrender in that sense. They'll fight till the death. Yes, the unpaid lower level besiege will defect or try. You know, there's rumors that President Pezeshkian, who's a figurehead, he's apparently tried to like seek, you know, amnesty and kind of leave for everywhere, Pakistan, Egypt, and the RGC is like, no, you're not leaving anywhere. You're staying put. Even Ali Khamenei's son, Mojtaba, rumor has it that he was in a coma or he died, and like they chose him as the next supreme leader, so that, you know, if he gets killed, then their preferred choice gets to run. It's lies. But so there is a chance that eventually there will be nothing really left of the leadership, and it will be transferred to the people. And I do think at that point you could have. I think Israel, even though a lot of Iranians may view them as they helped liberate us and we stand with the Israelis and all that, I do think not so much just as a religious thing, but for nuances we don't need to get into. I don't think Israeli forces would necessarily make sense on the ground, even though Israel would most definitely be a key economic partner in a future Islamic Republic of Iran. But I do see something where maybe, and I know it sounds unlikely, but it has to, you know, diplomacy is weird. It might be like a joint US, Russian, possibly Chinese. Then at that point, Macron, the loser, is going to wake up and be like, mais bien sûr, on va être là. You know, the Europeans are like that. When something looks inevitable and like a win, then they're like, bonjour, bonjour, here we are. And then they might be able to keep the peace. And then Reza Pahlavi comes, and he would have to be protected in some kind of green zone. And people could say, well, what kind? Well, that's a lesser of many evils. And then at some point, there might be a referendum where the Iranians would pick the form of government. Do we want a constitutional monarchy? I even coined it as a crowned republic, which is basically a constitutional monarchy. But given that the existing, you know, some people say Iran was a constitutional monarchy as of 1906, and that's correct. But the Islamic Revolution kind of nullified that, even if the king never abdicated. So you're starting right now from like a constitutional law as like an Islamic Republic. So in my opinion, it's easier to amend that to make it a crowned republic, not make it a theocracy. But I'll leave that to the lawyers. But it doesn't matter. Crowned republic or constitutional monarchy being one choice, the other one being a republic, the other one being je ne sais quoi. And then they would vote for the leader. You know, Reza Pahlavi would not be a president. He would not be a prime minister. If they want him, then it would be a constitutional monarchy, and he would be some kind of symbolic, but like active in areas. And then there would be a, you know, prime minister and ministers of this and minister of that. The challenge is if the Iranian people don't trust anybody that was involved in like the Department of Agriculture because they were kleptocrats, I try to tell them, I'm like, you got to draw the line somewhere. You got to forgive some people, right? Again, but I'm outside. I'm Canadian. It just happens to get the culture. It's up to them, right? I'm just relaying what they're saying. I'm Ask GPTing it for people, you know, to explain it to Westerners because they're like, why are Iranians celebrating? Now, there is also the possibility that Donald Trump spins this into, so that was option one. I'm not saying the most likely. Option two is Donald Trump says, okay, enough's enough. The price of oil, the economy, midterms, whatever. And he goes, we picked this guy, you know, Akbar Papatutu, whatever, and it doesn't matter to him. He doesn't know right from left, even if the guy's chanting like Bagher Ghalibaf, who's like the lead Death to America guy. There's video of him saying this. He's militant. He's going to plot every second of his life for vengeance. You know, those rumors, which I don't buy. I think it's the kind of, oh, we're going to talk to this guy, and then they nuke him like a day later. But they might just find somebody that to them, they're like, it's good enough. We took out the regime. We destroyed their missiles. We set it back. They agreed to this and that. They are not going to mess with the Strait of Hormuz. Victory. It'll be spin. And then the American people are like, okay, we won. America, USA. And the Islamic Republic will be like, we won. We defended against the Zionist state, the great Satan. We won. We brought them down to their knees. And the truth is neither, really. You could argue both won and both lost. The third scenario, frankly, is that the U.S. does eventually send in ground troops. And Israel, because Mossad, it's not going to be the first time there's going to be Mossad boots on the ground. Although usually it's in and out or it's their spies. But I think there is a possibility that people who are Marco Rubio knows his stuff, right? So Marco Rubio could be like, yo, guys, there's no way we're leaving this regime intact because they're going to plot to kill all of us. You know what I mean? They're going to come back. They've said, you're going to be at your tourist resort. You think you're on vacation? We'll get you. Mm-hmm. You know, one of them said, if you are any country that buys U.S. bonds, you're funding this war against us. So we're going to hit banks. Okay. So there is a scenario where the U.S. sends in, probably from the south, but technically could be parachuted into Kurd area, Kurdish Iran, maybe even Kurdish Iraq side, but doesn't matter right now. And then they basically start to choke. There would be some loss of life, but then that's when you, over time, further degrade the outstanding missile launcher areas that you've not taken out. You further decimate the Basij, who may not have the bases anymore, but there's still a ton of them out there. You further scare off. So now Iranians are fighters, but I remember like Israeli general during the Iraq war always saying like the one group of people that we're afraid of are actually Iraqi soldiers. They were like, those guys are going to fight. But I mean, Iraq fought for 8 years and it was a stalemate, but you could argue Iran won in the end because Saddam Hussein, when he got executed, people were speaking Farsi, right? If you're going to be intellectually honest. So Iran kind of won, and Iran at one point, the Islamic Republic, was bragging that it controlled 4 Arab capitals, Beirut, Damascus, Baghdad, and a fourth one that right now I don't remember, but it should be pretty obvious. And the one in, I believe, Yemen. So my point is, if you decapitate more IRGC, you dismantle the missiles that remain, you decimate more Basij. Yes, a lot of Iranian soldiers may keep fighting in the IRGC, but you are going to increase the odds of finishing this regime, where even if they don't surrender, you can imprison. Some people would go to trial. Now, the irony, the sad part is the real criminals, the Khameneis and the Larry Johnnies who bragged about Larry Johnny, poet, great. Adolf Hitler was a great painter. You know what I mean? Jeffrey Dahmer was a culinary wizard, maybe. You know what I mean? Jeffrey Epstein had a soft spot for kids, and that's really distasteful. But my point is, anybody that sits there and says Ali Larijani was a poet, studied Kant, yeah, it was a Kant, all right. You know, so it's like crazy that these Western useful idiots are like, because they hate America, because they're losers in life and they hate capitalism, and they're super racist against the Jews, Zios. That's all you hear, or Zios. Anyway, you can tell I'm getting a bit emotional. So my point is, that's really how you would nip it in the bud. And then America would not need bases in all these countries. You know, you would have peace. Israel, it's like this much land. Okay, even if you hate Israel, even if you hate the history of it, it exists. They built a country. Meanwhile, the other side just, you know, threw the Palestinians under the bus and they have nothing to show for it. So you have all this other land, and all of these Arab countries are Islamic now because of colonialism, but you object to that colonialism. You know what I mean? So it's just a bunch of hypocrites. So I think those are really the 3 scenarios. You know, which one is likely? It's hard to tell, because if Trump goes, yeah, I don't want to lose. And Trump is like, he's pragmatic, but he's not. You know, he might just be like, yeah, my ego is not going to take a tie or a perceived loss. And so I think most likely is the regime has been set back dramatically, but unless you finish the job, you just created a hell of a hangover. It's going to ricochet back. I mean, these guys that were saying death to America before, they're not going to be writing Hallmark cards for you, bro. You know, so
Yeah.
I think I could see that happening where there might be boots on the ground. And because again, the difference, I did want to say this, the difference is not so much the surrender, the psychology, the resilience, is like the Iranian people overwhelmingly are against the regime. So the Iranian people are never going to, at scale, forget at scale, they're not going to regroup around the flag. The people you see now, it's like actors, or it's actually, let me be, I don't want to be not sensitive. Absolutely, you see some victims who are like, I lost my daughter, I lost my husband. Tragic. Hate every second of it as an Iranian. But they are used as propaganda tools by the regime. That's the info that comes out. You don't see the 9 other people out of 10 that are like, it's tragic, but if I die, it's the fault of Khamenei, it's the fault of IRGC. And if I die, but it leads to the freedom of Iran, it's worth it. So in the end, the IRGC and the mullahs are just going to they're going to shrink and shrink and shrink. So whether it's a transfer, surrender, imprisonment, or death, the regime will end. Because if not by US forces, by the people, it's just, how long do you want it to go? I said something and somebody called me out, so I don't need to mention it. When people were like, when does this ever happen? I go, well, World War II, Germany and Japan, those regimes had to end. And I pointed out, I never condone it. Somebody was like, you condone the nuking of Iran. I was like, are you crazy? I'm anti-war. I was even anti-sanctions before January 26th. I said, because somebody could call me out and say, well, the Japanese got nuked. What are you talking about, bro? I said, the Japanese did not like to be nuked. But I asked a lot of people, I researched, I did my homework. Japanese society views ending World War II faster, without saying thanks to the nuclear bombs, but ending it faster was a good thing. So the sooner you end this, I'm not condoning a nuke, absolutely not. That's not what I said. But like Germany and like Japan in World War II, and like Korea, if you want these countries to prosper, if you want peace, you have to end this regime, because it is built on anti-West, anti-America, death and destruction.
Interesting situation and far from over. So we'll continue to monitor the latest updates. And thank you for your insights on this today, Ash. And stay tuned, everybody, to WatchMojo for more coverage on this conflict as